I think success in general for a true artist is just being able to be successful enough to be as creatively free as you can.
Hey folks, Monica Nevi's on the show. Monica is a stand-up comedian. Now, we haven't had too many stand-up comics on the show, so I was really excited to book this interview. Monica is from the Seattle area, born and raised, and she tours nationally and internationally. She has opened for acts like Michael Ian Black, Nick Swardson. She has headlined a Bumbershoot, and she's just a fantastic voice in the comedy arena. I got a chance to see her at the Yakima Seasons Performance Hall here in Yakima. She did great. And we had a really nice chat about what her journey was like in college, where she thought she was on a track to become basically a coach. She was in athletics. She got injured and she shifted her sights into comedy. And how she got up on that stage the first time for her first open mic is one of the stories that she tells, among many others, in our chat. So she has 2 #1 comedy albums. Her website is at monicanevi.com. And she also has a great YouTube channel if you want to check that out. Super funny. She's got clips from her stand-up acts at various clubs. She has bits that she does. She's got her podcast series on there. She has 2 podcasts, HugLife and Dumb Pitches, it's called. 2 fantastic podcasts. So really exciting guest to have on the show, and I can't wait to hear what you think. So go ahead and leave a review about the show after listening. If you'd be so kind to do that, I'd appreciate it. And enjoy our chat with Monica Nevi. Well, Monica Nevi, welcome to Dream Path Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I saw your show in Yakima.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And thanks for making the trip over to Yakima. We don't have a lot of folks that travel from outside to put themselves out there in that way in Yakima. It's just, it's not a big comedy town, as you know, as you probably picked up on when you booked the gig.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
But yeah, you did great. It was a nice set. I watched it streaming. I wasn't there, but I did get a chance to see the camera turn on the audience, and I could see what you were talking about in terms of the awkwardness of being able to see every set of eyeballs that's in that room.
That's funny.
How different is that room than most of the gigs that you have on the West Side?
I mean, just most comedy gigs in general are that stereotypical, like brick walls, low ceiling, a lot of people real close together, which obviously right now isn't as much, but it's like a really tall ceiling. It was really bright in there. I could see everybody. And then they had tables at certain seats, but not, that's what I figured out later, was that they sat everyone where the tables were. So there was like, 3 or 4 rows of people and then a huge space and then another row of people because there was more tables in the back. So it was, comedy's an atmosphere. And when you're next to people and they're laughing, you laugh harder, things like that. And so They were spaced out weird, which is what a lot of places are spaced differently right now too. But yeah, it was just, I could see everybody and it was real bright. It's a beautiful room, but interesting for comedy.
It is. I think it's an old church.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see a comedy show and people show up for it and support that type of, arts in Yakima. We just don't see it happening very often. So
yeah, I had done some shows, a few years ago at different places. I think I've done the Capitol Theater before, and then there was like a little comedy club for a little while, but nothing really.
Was that the one that was in Sela?
That was a different one. I know what you're talking about, but I never actually did that one, although I know the lady that owns it, or owned it. No, it was inside of a hotel and it was like in Yakima, but it was maybe only open for like 6 months or so.
So what were your impressions of, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, of the Yakima crowd that you faced Saturday night versus maybe towns that are a little more progressive?
It's an interesting, let's see. They were very mixed age demographic. which makes things a little bit more complicated because it's like, well, I can do jokes that I know an older crowd would like, or I could do jokes that I know a younger crowd would like, or whatever. But then there's a mix. So it's like, well, some of you are going to like this and some of you are going to like, not that all my material is like only for one person, but yeah, a lot of my new stuff is kind of about being a millennial and also like parenting as a millennial. And so it works for everybody, but obviously it really hits with like a millennial crowd. And so there was like a few tables where they were like, this is the greatest thing ever. And then, some of the older people were like, all right, yeah, that's fine.
What was the lady with the puppet doing during the millennial bits?
That's the thing. Larry, the puppet, really liked me, which is why it was a little distracting. But yeah, if you guys didn't watch or weren't there, there was a woman in the back row that had a puppet with her, like a big one.
A full what do they call that? A ventriloquist?
Like dummy, I guess. But
dummy.
It's and so she like Larry would react to my jokes. He'd laugh. He'd wave his hand a lot when he liked, which is why I eventually had to say something because I was like, "What is happening?"
Right. You can't go an entire show without addressing the puppet in the room.
Exactly. And so we talked for a little bit, but she wouldn't talk to me. She would talk through the puppet and put like her, and she was in the back row, so I couldn't really hear her. So it didn't go on for very long. But then, and I don't know this person. I don't know why she travels with a puppet. But as soon as I get off stage, the owner of the manager of the theater had told the headliner, Brad, that don't talk to her. And I was like, okay. Oh, goodness. Well, I would have been good to know. Like, they had warned him that there was a lady with a puppet in there and just don't acknowledge it.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to encourage puppets. That's just not.
Well, I think they thought there was like a reason for it, which she did, of course, come after the show and talk to me for like way too long.
Oh no.
Told me about that. Larry is 2 months old, but then she owns a pool and spa store.
Okay.
In Yakima.
All right.
And so she ended up showing me YouTube videos of their commercials.
Wow.
Yeah, It was interesting. But what I had gathered from the experience, because I think just even after the show there, she had about 2 glasses of wine, was that she was pretty intoxicated. So
okay. All right. That makes sense.
They were a little more nervous.
Well,
about that than I think she was just drunk. So
I guess if you look at the bright side, she gave you some material to work with. I mean, you've got to be able to work that into future bits somehow.
I'm going to talk about it for sure. I mean, I'm going to, they had filmed that, so we get a copy of it.
Right.
And I kind of want to tell the story and then put the clips of me talking to the puppet up with it and just put it on YouTube or something. Because it is one of the, Brad's been doing comedy for like 35 years. And he was like, that's never happened. Like I've never had anybody with a puppet in the audience. Neither have I. So
I would guess that every show that you do, there's something that comes at you. There's something that you weren't expecting that requires you to be really on your toes, and that develops chops in terms of just improvisational skills and being able to be nimble on stage.
Yeah, definitely. And unfortunately, I think with any art, nothing goes exactly as you hope, as you plan. You're like, this is the exact jokes I'm going to do in this order, and maybe they don't go. Or, any musical performance, or I would assume with art, I know with like me actually drawing or something, I'm like, that does not look anything like I had hoped, but I'm not good at it. So it's always a bit different, but I can tell now before I get on stage what it's going to be like, I guess, like you can tell if they're drunk, you can tell if they're quiet, you can tell if they're conservative or more liberal or what, like you can kind of tell based on either the host or just judging people. Most of my job is just judging people, but what's going to happen. So that comes with time for sure, because you've seen something like most audiences in your career. And then the crowd work really, for me, maybe at because I've been doing it a little over 10 years, maybe around 7 years, I was like, I'm not really afraid of anything anymore. I performed at a lot of casinos on like a Wednesday or something, not ideal situations. So I'm not afraid to talk to people. That's not really my plan sometimes, but if that's what happens, that's what happens. And sometimes they like that more than my material, which is kind of annoying, but that's okay.
So crowd work, just for my listeners who are not familiar with comedy speak, tell us what crowd work is versus your set.
Right. So, and some people, I want them to believe that I'm just making everything up on the spot when I'm doing my material. But normally you go up and you have either an idea or an actual set list of like what jokes you want to do, what you want to talk about, things you've already written that you've been working on, or, that you got this kind of order figured out. And then crowd work is what happens when you just start talking to the crowd instead. And so that can be your classic, like, what do you do for a living? Or for me, most of the times, I don't get heckled very often in like a really negative way, but I do get drunk people just yelling out. And sometimes it's pretty positive, but it's like so distracting that you have to acknowledge it. Or, there's a lady with a puppet and you're like, we all see the puppet, right?
Right.
So crowd work is just that, like, riffing is what people talk about a lot, kind of just going off what the audience is either saying or doing or asking them questions. So it's that unscripted riffing, work with the crowd.
Yeah, isn't there a comedian who is really known for his crowd work? I think his name is Todd
Barry.
Todd Barry, yeah. And he has an album called Crowd Work.
Yeah, he did a special just of crowd work. It's really fun to watch. There's a few guys like that. Ian Bagg is like that, where he's just kind of known for it, which is really fun. It's nice to be able to add it to my act because, one, sometimes I do get tired of my own material, but also when the crowd is like wild, it's so difficult to be like, okay, listen to my jokes. It's
right.
just, it's easier and sometimes more fun and interesting to just be like, all right, what do you guys want to talk about?
Right. Well, I think crowd work for me, and I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur of comedy, but I'm a big fan. I've been to the Comedy Store multiple times, and my first comedy album was Steve Martin, The Jerk.
Yeah.
And my mom bought that for me when I was in grade school, and ever since then, a huge comedy fan. But I think what separates for me the real comics from the folks that maybe are just rehashing their old set over and over again is the crowd work. And, Dave Chappelle's great at it. Patton Oswalt, Todd Barry, of course, famous for it. But I thought you did wonderfully with a tough crowd. I mean, in a tough setup in terms of everybody being spread out. And then, of course, the demographics are working against you on that versus Brad, who comes in, a little more in their age group, and his material is a little more, I think, broader, I would say, in terms of that type of appeal. But you did great.
Thanks. Yeah, I do think that the comfortability and the crowd work and stuff just comes from having done it for quite a while. And it'll be good again. Not that was bad, but it's like, this is interesting. And a lot of the crowd work ends up having me think about something else and then sometimes turns into material. So it works out.
So you went to Seattle University or Seattle Pacific?
I went to Seattle University.
Okay. My alma mater too. I went there for law school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, I went to law school when their campus was in Tacoma, so I never got to see the Seattle campus.
Oh, well,
back
that's
in
very pretty. But
late 90s. Yeah. But so what did you study?
I studied sports and exercise science, actually.
Okay. And that was right in line with your basketball career? You were kind of hoping to go that direction?
Yeah, that was kind of the other option was probably to coach. I think that would be what I ended up doing had I not started. I started stand-up my junior year in college. So probably a couple years in, I was just like, this is what I want to do and I'll figure out how to make it my career. But yeah, I thought about, because, you could do athletic training or exercise physiology, like testing and stuff, which is really interesting to me. But stand-up just always felt like more of the direction I wanted to go in if I couldn't play anymore.
And so who were your influences before you made that decision to get up on stage for the first time?
That's a funny, okay. I used to listen to a lot of Dimitri Martin. I was a very like what you say is funny kind of person. Like you don't need to be too physical. I really like Nick Swardson. That was one of the first people I saw on like Comedy Central where I was like, I love this. Maria Bamford was someone that was probably the first woman I had ever seen like actually have a special. And I was like, oh, we're allowed to do that. That's great. Yeah, just people, it's kind of like, not that I'm like any of those three, but I like the just what you say and you think about it, and that's great. You don't need to be doing like high kicks and jumping off the stage for me,
Right.
at least, to enjoy it. So
I'm trying to find the common denominator for all three of those. And I think if I were to pick a word that ties all of them together, it's vulnerability, where they're just putting themselves out there and almost no ego whatsoever for any of those comics.
That would make sense to me. I think it is like their ability to continue to dissect just normal things and how it relates to them. I think maybe that's the biggest thing. I never even thought about that. People ask me a lot like, oh, well, what do you talk about? And it's like, well, I talk about things that have happened to me. You know, I talk about my family and jobs I've had and whatever, you know, the world, but through my eyes kind of thing. You know, I don't just talk about politics or I don't just do one-liners or whatever. And I feel like those three, it's kind of the same things. They always kind of relate it to themselves with that vulnerability, I guess, even though they're all pretty different from each other.
Yeah, but they're all making fun of themselves to some degree and pointing to the ridiculousness of their own existence.
Right.
And
or
personalities.
Thought processes. Yeah. Yeah, which is those guys. I mean, I've been lucky enough to either see or work with all three of them, which is kind of crazy when you're, you know, I was 14 watching them and now I'm with them. But none of them have really changed the fact that they can be vulnerable, because we've all seen someone we liked when we were younger and then they get really famous and then the topics don't really relate to you anymore or something like that, you know. And then I worked with Nick Swardson maybe 2 years ago and I was just blown away with how incredibly relatable and just hilarious his stand-up still was. And I mean, he was a great stand-up to start with, so it's not like he didn't have any foundation or anything, but people know him from these movies sometimes, and then they're like yelling out movie titles at him while he's trying to do his do his material, and he's like, yeah, I was in that, all right, cool, you know. But he also like had some really funny material about filming certain movies, and not in like a name droppy way. Like I've seen a lot of comics start to talk about SNL or whatever they were on, and you feel like they're just kind of, I don't know, trying to impress you. But he just had really good material about like the actual work of filming a movie, and that kind of addressed people yelling it out, and then he would move on and to like, you know, normal, stuff about dogs or whatever. It just, you know, really impressive, and all still really kind of writing in the same way, I think.
Every time I think of Nick Swardson, the image of him on Reno 911 in his short shorts and his roller skates, I just cannot stop thinking about that. It is the funniest character on Reno 911.
Well, and he has a bit about his mom telling her friends that he's on a cop show. Because he's from Minnesota, you know, so she's all sweet about it. And he's like, yeah, you know, and then she's got to tell him that he's a gay prostitute on rollerblades or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of the comics that are probably the polar opposite of Bamford and Swardson and Dimitri. And those would be for me, like Jamie Foxx, Eddie Murphy, Anthony Jeselnik, that are very ego driven.
Right. I could hear, Jeselnik and I mean, like in terms of the types of comics out there, I totally see your comedy fitting in with the vulnerable side of things, the vulnerable end of the spectrum. And that's the type of comedy that I really appreciate, because it's putting yourself out there in a way that exposes your underbelly. You know, it's like, this is me, and accept it or not. Yeah.
And I listened to your album, and mostly Finger Guns. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And same thing. And you've just got a great vibe, and your career. Tell me where you're at right now. How would you, if you're sitting on a bus and there's maybe a grandma type who asks you, what do you do for a living? And, what are where are you at now and what are your career goals? How would you describe your career right now in comedy?
Well, obviously killing it because I'm on a bus with my grandma. No,
And
I'm
you're
pretty
talking to me too. So
yeah. When I first started, my goal was to have stand-up be the only thing that I do, have it be my career. And it's been about 6 years that it's been full time. And some of those times were much more scary than others. But I like reevaluating what I want the future to look like and how I want this to continue kind of happens constantly. Um, I've had opportunities or experiences that kind of changed what I wanted to do. I think for a long time I was like, oh, I could write for a TV show. That sounds great. And then I made a documentary series and I was like, oh, I like making my own stuff. I kind of really like unscripted, like you just learn these different things.
Talk
The
about 80
main
for 80
goal,
or
yeah, 80 for 80. Sorry.
yeah, I
Yeah.
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. The main goal for me at this point is to continue to create things that I want to make and kind of cultivate this little fan base that is interested in exactly what I'm doing. They know what they're into when they're coming to a show, they know what they're getting into. And it's working so far. It's just a very slow burn. Like I feel like my whole career is just a bit of a slow burn, which is okay because I do feel like it's going to be what I want and I won't get this kind of confusion of, I was on a TV show that has nothing to do and played a character that is nothing like my act. And then they are very confused when they come and see, like not that I would gladly be on a TV show too, but, but I like the idea of people knowing what they're coming to see and being excited to see that thing. And, which then brings you to dabble in different things and kind of create, you got the podcasts and the documentary series and the meditation album and just weird different stuff so that there's a diverse portfolio of things to find me through. But stand up will always be the main focus, the main goal. The other things are so that people want to come and see me do stand up.
Yeah. So let's go back to your junior year.
Okay.
You decide to try stand up for the first time. What were you thinking? In here, I'm talking from the standpoint of a parent. You're in college. What the hell are you thinking? Standing up on a stage doing stand up, and what called you to that? To that type of art.
It's so interesting. I mean, none of it really makes sense on paper because I never did any type of performance anything. I was an athlete and that was it. And I think I had been on stage maybe twice when I was in elementary school, nothing. I was pretty shy too, I get really nervous when I had to do like school projects and stuff. But that was kind of a defense mechanism. When I was doing serious stuff, I would make a couple of jokes and it would make me feel a lot more comfortable if the class laughed versus, making them cry or something. I don't know. I so my junior year was actually, so I had been injured playing basketball. I tried to come back my sophomore year and I just had more and more injuries and it just wasn't looking like I was going to be able to continue to play. And that was what happened. I had to stop playing. I stayed with the team and I did an internship with them because it did, fit the degree. So it was about maybe 8 months after that I had been writing jokes for probably 2 years. I knew what I would do if I got on stage. I knew because you look it up online. I would Google like once a week, where do you go to do open mics in Seattle? It's still the same answer. Like, I don't know why I would look it up so often. And then, they have all these little like rules, like don't do this, don't do this. Don't ask the crowd how they're doing. You get 3 minutes, you get the light at this time, whatever. Like I knew exactly how it was going to go.
Don't ask the crowd how they're doing. Is that just considered filler or something?
Yeah, at an open mic specifically, you could do it if you're, if it's a 3-piece show, but because there's 20, 30 comics on a show and if everybody goes up and asks how they're doing, you
got to get to it. Yeah.
Yeah. We've answered this before. So I like knew what 3 minutes I would do. I practiced in the shower like a lot, for months. I mean, had thought about it for a really long time. And then the first time I tried to go to an open mic was supposed to be at Giggles in Seattle, which is notorious for being one of the worst venues in comedy history. People will say it. They've been on very famous podcasts. Mark Maron mentioned it on WTF that it's like one of the worst was. And so I had gone just because there was like 2 clubs in the area, and that was one of them. And it was on this day that I didn't have to work or whatever, you know. And we go to walk up, and the owner is outside, and he's like, "Oh, we're closed, but we're going to reopen soon, and you know, you can come back to an open mic then." Which was a weird, because I didn't go back for about 6 months after that. And that club turned from a comedy club to a strip club. And then back to a comedy club eventually. Now it's owned by different people, so it's fine. But which was an interesting, like, maybe it wouldn't have gone well, you know? So it was the universe saying, like, hold on, don't do it quite yet, you know? So then it was about 6 months later, I did an open mic at Laughs in Kirkland when it was in Kirkland. And I did it in January and did not know that resolution comedy was a thing. That wasn't my plan. It was just when I could go again, I guess. I went, brought some friends to watch one week. And then the host actually ended up knowing one of the guys I was with. And he was like, you know, he was talking to me, and I was like, well, I want to do that. I want to try it. And he's like, oh, just come next week. Just do it. And so I did. I mean, I don't know why I needed him to tell me that I should do it, I guess, or something. You're supposed to bring 4 people, and I lied and said that I did, you know, just weird. Well, I didn't want anybody to see yet.
Right.
But I think I had, you know, thought about it for so long, and it was January, which means the room is full with people that aren't doing stand-up. So it's a lot different than performing at an open mic where it's just comics and stuff. And so it went really well my first time.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's why the first time I tried to go didn't work out, or, you know, whatever, because this was the time I was supposed to do it.
So what's resolution comedy?
When your New Year's resolution is to do stand-up. And so
got it. I gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. And that is a common rule with clubs, is that to get up for the first few times, you're supposed to bring like 6 people or whatever. So there's like a full room of people who aren't comics. Now I love doing open mics in January because I'm like, oh, there's a great audience that doesn't know me, and here we go. You know.
So it went well. Yeah. And did at that point, had you had the 8 months of jokes that you wrote down before you got up on that stage?
Yeah, which is, I usually don't tell this part of the story, but 2 weeks later, a friend of mine was working for like the student body at his college, and they were doing a stand-up show, and he's like, oh, well, I can get you time on this show. And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. And he just continues to be like, okay, you can do 7 minutes. Wait, I think I can get you more, until he has me doing 15 minutes on this show at a college, which you're supposed to be like very clean at like, there's just so many things I don't know at this point about the industry, and I'm just going with it. So I did have all this material that I had written, but I have not tried it before. And I don't know what I'm doing, you know? So I end up doing the show, doing about 12 of the 15 minutes based on what I have. Some of it is fine and good. And it was a really big crowd, which is so, you know, now you're like, yeah, a college show like that would be awesome. But that's not how college shows are. You're in a cafeteria while people are eating. No one's paying attention. But like I had an abortion joke, like just stuff I wouldn't do now and didn't think about then, you know?
Right.
Oh man, it's painful to think about it now, because it's like, I just knew so little. I had done 2 open mics and then was like, yeah, I'll do 15 minutes.
Wow.
At the college show, you know? Like,
that's a big step.
So silly. But then, you know, and then there was plenty of nights that didn't go well, or new jokes that didn't go well. So I had a good start, which I think kept me holding on to it, you know? And I wonder if that very first night hadn't gone well, would I have kept doing it? I don't know. But
so what does doing well feel like and look like and sound like because my definition, like I'm not a golfer, but I used to golf like maybe once a year at this convention I went to. And every time I golfed, it was awful. It was like I was terrible at it. But if I just got one shot in, like one drive, that was like, wow. Even if it's just lucky, I felt like the whole trip was worth it. And so how do you look at performance and the feedback that you're getting? Can one joke make it all worthwhile, or how do you assess that?
That's an interesting, I think that is true for some people. And then actually, like helps me make sense of some other people's careers where they've just been doing open mics for 12 years and not well. And you're like, I don't know why you keep doing this, but okay. But that's maybe I don't know. It's their one golf tournament a year and it feels good at one point. It needs to be a bit of a higher percentage for me to actually feel good about it than just one good shot, but it feels amazing. Obviously, it's almost like a high. It's still, for me, every time before I get on stage, I'm like, what a dumb concept. Like, I'm just going to say stuff that I thought of and they're going to listen to me. And usually they like it. It's just such a weird thing because it's not, it's not poetry. It's not a song. It's not the same type of live performance that you would think of. You're like, I'm just going to talk and hopefully you like it. From an open mic perspective, or if I'm doing something new, if I did 5 brand new minutes and 3 of them got laughs, I'd probably feel like that was something's there. I can work with it.
Yeah.
But now it's like, sometimes I get really picky or like over analytical. Like Saturday was fine. It was a good set. They liked me, but the room itself was so weird. And like the sound, it didn't sound like the normal, like, oh, I'm doing well, So I still feel weird, like viscerally, because it doesn't quite sound the way that I want it to. I want them to clap and I want to, stuff like that.
It sounds like a socially distanced, performance hall.
Yeah.
And that's just not a comedy club.
Right.
sound.
It just doesn't sound the same.
Yeah, right.
It feels, oh my gosh, and nothing will feel worse than doing a Zoom show when everyone's muted. So I can't really complain too much anymore. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. There is something like just really incredible about thinking of something that you haven't told anyone yet, telling them, and then them really thinking it's funny, and you're like, I was right. I knew it was funny, like.
Yeah. Do you find go ahead.
Sorry, there's a little bit of like, I don't quite get the same. This is what I imagine it's like to be a musician, right? You walk out and everybody's like cheering, and that feels great even before you perform. Like you have this like amped up. I don't quite feel like that. I feel like I need to prove myself first. And so just like with the school presentations, it takes me getting a laugh first to kind of go, okay, now I can be a little bit more comfortable every time I perform. So even if it was a crowd full of people that like were there to see me, loved me, already knew, me from whatever else, I still feel like I have to give them what they're there for before I can feel comfortable. I'm going to make sure they're not disappointed in what I'm doing.
So your process in terms of refining, are you constantly making adjustments when you get up on stage and you try something? And are you experimenting with timing, with switching wording? And is it a constant state of revising and, redrafting? I don't know how to describe it, but, changing your set to improve it.
I think that's pretty common for people. And yes, I'm always kind of moving things around and adding little parts. And sometimes that'll take months where it's like, I wrote this one part and then 3 months later, I think of this other joke and you're like, oh, those go together perfectly, And so sometimes it takes time. I, however, pretty normally the joke is fairly formed when I first write it down. Like my mind goes pretty quickly in that. And then I almost have trouble sometimes making adjustments after that, because I'm like, this is just how this joke goes. I'm pretty good at switching order and being like, well, that part's funnier, so it should go last, or this, this builds up this way. That stuff I do a lot. Or just even content wise, like your whole chunk, you're like, oh, well, talking about the stuff about my family goes better after the stuff about dating, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the little jokes itself, like the bits itself, they're fairly formed when I have brought them to the stage. I think I don't know if it's insecure or nervous or what it is. So I do think through them pretty thoroughly before I ever try them. And some people are like, well, I wrote down condoms, so I'm just going to see what happens when I'm up there. Like that doesn't work for me. So
yeah, it's interesting. I know some comics are very like Mark Maron, for instance. I mean, kind of a talky guy gets up there and just, I think his narcissism which is great, by the way. I'm not trying to disparage him when I say that. Yes. Narcissistic, but if, he has a podcast and the first 15 minutes of every podcast are about him and, what he's eaten for breakfast that morning and how he feels about his cats. But that's just his stand-up style. And he gets up there and just kind of talks through things and works things out. It sounds like you're working, like you are pretty fully formed when you get up on stage in terms of the actual jokes that you're writing. It's a very joke-centered performance.
Yeah, I don't know why that is compared to other things, or why I like doing crowd work, even though that is how I perform. Like I like to be prepared and do my jokes, and I want to do the material. But at this point, I do like doing crowd work. I was watching a comic this last weekend who I love. I think he's great. And there was some weird, this lady had a really weird laugh. This guy in the back kind of kept yelling out at him, and he just didn't acknowledge it at all. And I was like, I don't think I could do that. I'd need to say something, but he wanted to get through this new material he was working on. And so I think he just kept pushing through, and it wasn't distracting enough to derail everything, but everyone noticed,
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, I would have to say something, but I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But I do. I go up there and go, these are the jokes I want to do, and that's my plan. But if it goes somewhere else, then it just goes that way, I guess.
Yeah. I've been to the Comedy Store a few times, and I always feel like way more connected and part of a collective experience if there's crowd work happening.
Yeah.
And you also have this heightened sense as an audience member of fear that you're actually going to be engaged in some way. They're going to ask you questions, and it's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? Do I have dangerous. To be funny? Is he going to make fun of me? Is she going to make fun of me? But yeah, good work on the crowd work. So the podcast, I want to talk to you about your podcast. You have HugLife and also Dumb Pitches.
Dumb Pitches, yeah.
Yeah, but HugLife's been around for quite a while. You're in the 300s, right, for episodes?
Yeah, it might be nearing 7 years, I think. Right. Yeah, that one's been around for a while. It's me and Mike Colonna, and it's a positive podcast. We talk about nice stuff and good news stories and play stupid games and positive spin topics and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, we started so long ago, so now it's like, well, maybe it's needed, but it could be we're not trying to change the world or anything. Right. Just the idea that, when you watch the news and so it's hard, you're scrolling through your phone and it's just all this negative stuff. It can be overwhelming. It's like, well, then here, watch something stupid or listen to something stupid for half an hour to an hour every week. Yeah.
Well, I listened to your most recent episode involving Tony Hinchcliffe
right.
and the cancel culture. And I'm glad you brought that up because I saw I don't really watch the news. I look at social media way more than I look at the news.
Right.
But I did see that on my Twitter feed, that horrific bit that he did. And I don't know where he was. In Austin? Is that where he was?
Yeah, that's where everybody's moved. So
yeah. And I didn't look into it to hear how other comics were processing that. But it was nice to hear both of you address it the way that you did and how you brought up Louis C.K. and the folks that have been quote unquote canceled,
Right.
And what is going to happen with Tony. So that's a nice forum to have that discussion. I like your podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, and we do challenge ourselves sometimes where it's like, okay, we have to positive spin, you know, not wearing a mask or something, whatever, something we don't necessarily agree with, but we'll like challenge ourselves. And so the idea of the last episodes was like, okay, well, positive spin getting canceled, like actually getting canceled, which is, as a comic, you don't want to get canceled. You'd hope that you wouldn't do something that would warrant that. But let's just do it from that perspective then. What would be good about actually getting canceled? So, yeah, it's just silly and fun. But that stuff, that's what was going on,
Right.
That was, yeah.
What are your thoughts on cancel culture as it relates to comics and bits and just bad bits like Tony had a bad night?
Yeah,
or
that
that
was
type
interesting.
of thing.
I let some of my own experiences and bias get in the way when I watch stuff like that because he had never been nice to me. I don't really like him separately.
Can we let's give some context to my listeners here because
Okay.
this is like inside baseball because I listened to your podcast and I've seen this clip of Tony Hinchcliffe doing this intro to his show that was very racist, but maybe you can describe it better than I can.
Right. So it was the host of the show right before him. His name was Peng Dang, and he had just finished his set, which sounded like, and I'd read more that sounded like it went pretty well, but he's Chinese and he was talking a lot about, kind of the Stop Asian Hate thing and just how Asian Americans are being attacked recently and making jokes about how America owes China, all the people in that room go to Walmart and that's where they get their stuff from. It's just basically like, hey, be nice to Asian people. Here's some jokes about it.
Right.
So then he brings up Tony Hinchcliffe, who was on the show. I don't know if he's headlining or what. Just normal, he's been on Netflix and whatever. Here's Tony Hinchcliffe. And then it was really odd. I don't know. So Tony's known as being, I guess, a ball buster would be the way, you just kind of, he's mean. I don't know. That's his thing, though. Like he has a podcast called Kill Tony where they listen to comics do a minute and then they just attack them, basically. They're just like mean to him. And people like that. And then I'm sure people in the audience knew who he was and whatnot. So he gets on stage and he immediately starts, I don't even know how you would, just talking bad about the host comic that had been on, and then using really like racial slurs and calling the audience race traitors for laughing at his jokes and like just weird. And then he did this really offensive Asian voice to like talk about his jokes.
Yeah.
And it just seemed really just hateful. I don't know. It wasn't, because I'll be honest, we mess with each other all the time when we get on stage. When we follow an act, it's very common to pick something out of somebody else's act. It's not necessarily that you're being mean, but it's like, I'm just going to make a joke about that person or their, I don't know, their shoes, whatever. It's just, it's common to be like, well, we can all see this, so I'm going to make a joke about it. But no one is using a racial slur to describe the person that was just before them. It was really poorly thought out, I guess, if he was trying to just get
to be fair or charitable to him. Yeah, poorly thought out.
To get a reaction or make fun of him. I don't know, but it was really weird. And then he just kept going. And so what happened was, I think it was the friend of the host was filming his set for him, like filming the host set. And so the camera was still on. So they get all this on camera. And then the host shared it and was like, well, this was nice for Asian Heritage Month, So he got, I guess, canceled in some ways. His agency dropped him and some other shows dropped him and stuff. The thing, like, I am all for the freedom of speech part of stand-up, and you can say whatever you want. And my hope is always that it polices itself. Because if you're going to go up there and spew hateful words, I want the audience to not react, like that. And then that's enough. That should show you that you can't do that. But some people are so aggressive and so like that. It didn't even feel like jokes. If you watch the video, like it doesn't really feel like jokes. It feels very aggressive and like attacking.
Yep. I'm with you on that. It just did not feel jokey at all. It just felt hateful and targeted.
Yeah.
And mean.
Right. And so for that, I do think I'm totally fine with repercussions of people. I mean, that's pretty blatantly racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he knows that word is not a nice word to say. Like, it's just, it wasn't an accident,
Yeah.
And then other things that are very, I don't know, sexual misconduct. I think you should get canceled. I don't know. That's just, I mean, the term is odd, canceling, but I think if you're hurting people, if you were in any other job, you wouldn't be allowed to say those things or do those things either. So why, just because we're comedians, do you feel that, it's cancel culture, when really it's like, we just don't have an HR. So,
right. Well, it's consequence culture.
Yeah.
It's like, let's have some consequences.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's fine. Like, whatever those consequences are, they are an organic result of, a true reaction of the crowd and of the folks that support this comic financially, with sponsors and whatnot. And isn't that capitalism at its best?
Right.
That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah. I feel like somebody tweeted that, was like, well, yeah, this is just capitalism working now. You're getting things taken away because you made a poor decision. So
yeah. Well, I appreciated the way you talked about it on the podcast. And then I switched over to dumb pitches, and it's a great concept, by the way. Tell my listeners what that is about. So that's a newer podcast you have, right?
Yeah, that one's pretty new. It's called Dumb Pitches, and the tagline is talking to successful people about their worst ideas. So it's a lot of comics, but we've had some musicians. I had Kylie Rothfield on, which you have also talked to her.
Oh, that's how we connected, right?
Yeah.
Very cool.
And then some other like YouTubers and some different people, just that basically they come on and I say, okay, here are your good ideas. We have to give you some credibility. So, it's their credits. They've been on these shows. They wrote these shows. They wrote this book. They whatever. And then I say, okay, what is one of your bad ideas or some of your bad ideas? And they have ranged so incredibly, like just different. And I give them like a little example list kind of like, it could be anything, a business idea, a script, a bad relationship, a date, whatever. And then just let them go from there. And so some people have had one idea that we really kind of get in and dissect, and I ask a lot of questions. And then of course, no matter what, I feel like we get on this thing of like, how can we actually make this work? And then some people have had like lists of like 20 that are just like, here's all these terrible inventions I've thought of, but they're hilarious and it's fun. And yeah, I enjoy it.
So tell me about the hustle of being a comic. You're doing this full time now. You've been doing it full time for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And I think I heard you talk about trying to get on the potluck stage at the Comedy Store, and that there were like hundreds of comics that had signed up for this open mic. Tell us about that type of hustle and what effort it takes to actually get out there and be seen and be heard as a comic trying to break in to become more successful.
It's a really interesting, I think my biggest theory is that there is no one way to do it or no right way to do it, I think. I mean, especially now, we've seen people who have been doing stand-up for 2 years that have a good TikTok and now they could sell out a club. It's much different now, but it is this thing. If you want to do stand-up, which is what I wanted to do, and there's some people who do stand-up, but they want to act or, other things like that. So figuring out what exactly you want to do is part of it. There is this inherent like hustle, work hard thing when you first start, which is get on stage as much as possible. Don't worry about the quality of it. Don't worry, just the repetition and stuff. And so you see a lot of people just going from open mic to open mic, doing as many shows as they can, which is great. And I think that's helpful. I think when you get in the bigger cities, it skews in a weird way, though, where they'll do open mics and hang out at the same place forever, so that hopefully they'll get on stage at the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory or whatever it is. And then they have 5 minutes and that's it. And then I don't know if you hope that the right person's in the audience and then you get a late night set or whatever. But for me, the road has always been what made me funny and what made me better. And so probably about 3 years in, I was like, I'm going to do as much road stuff as I can. And then that was when I started to make enough money to do it. You can't really make a whole lot of money staying in one city, no matter what the city is.
Mm-hmm.
So that has become part of, I also like doing, those shows are better, going out places, even in the middle of nowhere. They're just excited that somebody came to, their town, but that's still like, I just wanted to do stand, that's still at the base of all of it is the doing the stand up. So it makes sense that I want to go and get better and add more and go to different places. But if you're like, I just want a really good 10 minutes and then I want to sell this script, like maybe your idea of the hustle is different than mine, or what's going to work, is different than mine. But
so yours is a road-based hustle.
I think so. Or just, because then, now I do more time, I headline more places. I can sell more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it eventually becomes really a financial thing, because for a long time you live this life that you're told you're supposed to live, which is the share a studio with another person and, barely eat and also worked for Postmates at the same time, whatever, But then at some point you're old enough, I would assume, or you just get smart enough to go, what if I did it a little bit different and then I could actually have a home and a family and eat better and, not have to work every single weekend, which is just now kind of what's happening for me, which I'm enjoying. And I think it helps me creatively to balance. That is something I started preaching to younger comics. And I don't know if that's what they want to hear. I think they want to hear the go to every open mic ever. And I'm like, no, have a life so then you can talk about it and relate to people. Because not everybody's just going to open mics every night. So, the balance has been huge for me. I think it's been helpful creatively. It helps me with my writing, and then kind of these other things that I've started to create on the side, or, focus on the podcasts and the YouTube stuff, and has just been better now that I've been able to kind of stabilize at least part of my life.
Yeah. So the tools of monetization then are obviously, the road gigs. You're getting paid to perform live. And then I noticed, I thought I heard something about Patreon. Do you have a Patreon account as well?
For HugLife, we have a Patreon. For me, I really, I've equated it to choosing an airline mileage plan and sticking with one. So in the last year when everything changed and, there was months where I wasn't doing anything live, it was all over the internet. I chose YouTube as the platform I wanted to focus on. And I post more on there, but I did more live streams and stuff like that. And so just recently, because we had brought it to a monetization level, which is just ads and stuff, and that's that same kind of trickle in, Spotify is the same thing where you can listen to my album 20,000 times and then I'll get $2. It's not that helpful, but they have another, a membership tier there, which I have utilized on YouTube. So you can do a membership. There's 3 different levels. You get the podcast early, you get behind the scenes episodes of my bad ideas. And then at the top tier, you get all of that, but then you get full shows, you get full 50-minute stand-up shows on there. And it's just more helpful financially. It's not, it's still a lot of marketing. And I wanted to be able to give people, because some people, especially on YouTube, I did a lot of research of okay, what are some of these other channels doing? And they're like, oh, just help me out, give me some money. And there's nothing, you don't get anything. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. So, I put the extra effort in to create other content that, I wouldn't normally want to put out 50-minute sets that are new, and some of it's crowd work and some of it, it's not a special. So I was like, well, if people want to support me and want to see that, then here you go. That can be a special thing just for you. So they're all different. And then the albums, all the streaming services are not great. It's better if you buy it from me.
Yeah.
But then Sirius XM, if it's on there, that is good. Like there's just, it's just an odd hodgepodge of other monetization separate from actually doing live shows.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to get your comedy on the Sirius comedy channels?
Yeah, a little bit. It took a while, which was a little disappointing when my album came out, but it ended up being on there. So that's good and super helpful because now I don't have to do anything and hopefully it just plays every once in a while,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's a lot of funny comics on the, there's like 3 or 4 comedy channels now, I think.
Yeah. When they had originally taken the whole album. Normally what they'll do is they'll go through and be like, well, we want these 4 or 5 tracks. But they took my whole album, which was great. For there's 3 channels that they wanted it for, which was the Laugh USA is like the normal clean one. Raw Dog is the dirty one, of course. And then there's one called She's So Funny, which is all female comics. And so now it's been played on those, but for a while it just hadn't. But I did it through a label and that was kind of their thing. So I try not to be annoying and just hope for the best.
Mm-hmm.
That eventually worked out.
Well, going back to your YouTube channel, it is really impressive what you've done with your channel. I mean, I have a channel, but I'm a total novice. I just put everything on there. It's not, subdivided into any sort of categories and it's a mess, but you put a lot of work into your YouTube channel.
Thank you. Yeah, I have. I just really never thought about it until maybe 4 years ago. That sounds about right. 4 years ago, I was on a show called Laughs, on a TV show called Laughs, and it was just like a clip show. It was on Fox at 11:30 p.m. or whatever. And I would get a little bit of a trickle in every once in a while when I was on an episode and get a few more followers and stuff. And then they decided to put it on YouTube. They decided to do clips on YouTube, and Kelsey Cook has the highest for them. And then I have the second highest viewed clip with, it's like over 1 million views, which is insane. And I get none of that. but because it started to get so popular, there's a couple of clips that are pretty high up there for them. It just trickled down to me. I got more, the people who actually really liked me enough would then kind of figure out where I was and came to me. And so it was right when YouTube had actually changed their monetization rules, where it went from anybody could do it to you had to have 1,000 subscribers. And I had like 150 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, that doesn't apply to me then, whatever. And then this video gets very popular and all of a sudden I have 900. And then I was like, well, damn it. Now I care. I didn't before, but now I do. And so it got over 1,000. Then they changed it again. You had to have a certain amount of watch time, whatever. So I started really focusing on that and then putting out new stuff and more stand-up on there. Because for a long time, we were like, don't put your stand-up out because then we want people to come and see it and then they'll know what it is. And now they're like, put everything out on TikTok so that they'll find you. So I just started putting more stuff out and that helped. And then, this last year was like, well, what if I put lots of stuff out and give you sketches and meditations and stand-up and lots of different stuff. And now the YouTube, the podcast, that was kind of the focus of it actually for Dumb Pitches. And then the Helium Network wanted the audio. So I was like, okay, it started out as just a video thing, but.
Yeah. So, man, I wanted to talk to you about comedy clubs, but I want to be respectful of your time. So what is the holy grail for comics in terms of what you are aspiring to accomplish? Is it the half-hour comedy special, the 1-hour comedy special on HBO or Netflix? What are you searching for in terms of, the stepping stone, the next step, and, your definition of success as a comic?
Yeah, I think that changes a lot too, I mean, a few years ago, we didn't know what a Netflix special was probably, but I think that's a big one. An hour Netflix or HBO special is pretty huge. And that's always been, an HBO special has always been pretty fancy. Comedy Central half hour was a big thing for a while, a little less now, but late night was a huge thing. It's still that's something I want really badly is a late night set.
What do you mean by a late night
really
set?
Changing.
Like Conan or something, or?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. I like to set my goals right when a show is ending. No, but yeah, like the Tonight Show or something, that would be great. Those credits still help you as far as getting booked in clubs. So that would be exciting, but it's also something that I've just wanted for a long time. So that would be great. I want somebody to do a special. I don't really care who it is at this point, you know.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, like I was like, I want to do an album, but I don't want to make it myself. I want a label to do it. And then a label found me. So hopefully it still works out that way. But I think, yeah, having a special and then being able to be picky about where you play. I honestly think that's the biggest top goal for everybody is like, I want to be able to play all the A clubs and headline them and do theaters and be able to set rules, you know, whatever, and not seem like a diva when you're just like, no, I just want to have a good show. I want to be in theaters and I want to not have to do 7 shows in a weekend when I can fill one room to do 2, you know, whatever. Stuff like that. I think it really comes down to it. And I don't know if comics always want to admit it, but that balance becomes more and more important. And so being successful actually helps you be more balanced. It helps you be picky. I mean, you see some of the guys who worked really hard for a long time and now have those Netflix specials and stuff. And you look at their schedules and you're like, oh yeah, they're doing 3 shows in September, but they're huge theaters, you know, like I get it. And that is, I mean, obviously money is helpful, but being able to get to a point where you don't have to work so hard that you might burn out is probably pretty important to what success looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for them, obviously, they're like, I'm going to do a Netflix special every year. I'm like, great, good for you. But not me yet.
Well, I think you've just described probably the quest of a lot of creatives, no matter what field they're in. They want to be able to pick and choose the work that they do. They want to be able to make more money, but not necessarily for the sake of making money, but just so that you're not scrambling to survive, and you can do what you want to do, but in a more pure way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and everybody, I think every artist, we've heard actors talk about it, musicians, it's that creative like freedom and wanting and feeling like you can do what you actually want to create. And that's the part of the cultivating your own audience with stand-up that is really what's at the core of it, because I can do really big shows opening for a Brad Upton, who I love, who's great, but his audience isn't mine, you know? So I don't have the creative freedom there to do exactly what I would do. So if I cultivate my own audience, that's a room full of people who are ready for me, then I feel really comfortable and I can do exactly the joke the way I wanted to do it or whatever, you know? So yeah, I think success in general for a true artist is just being able to be successful enough to be as creatively free as you can be.
2 more questions.
Okay.
I know this is going long. So how many female comics are out there when you're on the road? Are you the minority, or is it about 50-50, or what is the split?
Definitely not 50-50. As far as being on the road, there is even less than there are in general. When you go to some of the bigger cities, so in LA or New York, Chicago, there's a lot of female comics. I wouldn't say it's 50-50 even there, but it's, you know, there's more. But then the amount of women who are actually on the road, especially at my level where it's this middle between feature and headliner, you can look at a calendar and not see a woman on it at all, you know, and for the most part, when I'm on the road, I am very lucky if there's another woman on the show with me. Unless I'm headlining and they're like, we're going to make it all women because it's a circus. It's like, you can't just have it be a normal show, whatever. But yeah, there's not very many as a feature at all. And then not for people like me who aren't famous or haven't had, you know, the Netflix special or whatever, there's not very many female headliners that don't have those credits. So it's a lot of work too. And honestly, to be a woman on the road in, you know, Oklahoma or whatever, it can be a little unnerving, it feels a little unsafe at times. So I totally understand when people are like, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, I'm glad you're doing it. What advice would you give to young folks, say a room full of high school students, college freshmen, who want to do what you did in your junior year, get up on stage and tell jokes?
Oh, to do that specifically.
Yeah.
I think just for young people in general, the biggest thing that I wished I had done was tried more things. Like, don't let people tell you what you should be or what you're good at. I say that because I was always very convinced I was like a science mind, and I was an athlete, and I liked sports, and like that was who I was. And I really never gave myself any credit for being creative or writing or any of that. And now I'm like, what if I had focused on that earlier? What if somebody had told me you're a good writer, So the biggest thing is like, try as much as you can and write as much as you can. If you want to be a comedian, write it first. I get people that come up to me after shows all the time. They're like, well, I'm thinking about trying an open mic, which is, if you're thinking about it, do it, but be prepared, write some stuff, see how it goes. If you want to do it just because you're funny at work sometimes, I don't know if that's the right reason. Well, there's plenty of people. I'm very quiet when I had day jobs. So it's plenty of people that I used to work with. I'd be like, you do stand up? They're like, you never talked. And I'm like, oh, right. I just didn't like you. That's why. But yeah, I think my life more and more becomes, why didn't I say anything? Why didn't I do that before? Not in a regret way, but like, look at what happens when I do. Look at what happens when I do take a chance, when I do actually do things. Usually it's good. So try it. And here's the other part. Like, no matter what happens, the worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't go well, or someone says no, or, I think we're afraid to ask a lot just because they might say no. And then what? You're still in the same position you were.
Yeah.
So yeah, just if you want to try it. Go and watch as much as possible. If you're stand up or anything else, I think people get competitive a lot and they don't want to watch other people's art, but I think it makes you better. I think it, it just helps. You're always going to have a favorite, you might as well go. Sometimes it'll make you feel better about yourself. I don't know. Yeah. And then my biggest advice for anybody getting into stand-up is remember that it is a job. It can be a job. And so that means don't be a dick to people. Be nice, be professional, show up on time. Don't get too drunk. Just because it has a little bit different environment doesn't mean it's still... I know people who are very untalented that work a lot because they are professional. Like, it can get you plenty of places, and it gets you booked again. It gets you to come back. You're not going to lose fans because you were too hammered to do your set. Just remember that it is, if it's something you care about, then treat it like that. Be professional and nice.
Nice. Well, great advice. Put yourself out there, be professional. Don't listen to what others say you're good at, and follow, your own instincts, it sounds like.
Yeah. Thank you for summarizing it. That was good.
Well, Monica Nevi, thank you so much for sharing your story on my podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle @DreamPathPod. And as always, go find your dream path.